The Corps of Royal Marines is the United Kingdom's amphibious light infantry force, forming part of the Naval Service, along with the Royal Navy. The Royal Marines were formed in 1755 as the Royal Navy's infantry troops. However, the Marines can trace their origins back to the formation of the English Army's Duke of York and Albany's maritime regiment of foot at the grounds of the Honourable Artillery Company on the 28th of October 1664. As a highly specialised and adaptable light infantry force, the Royal Marines are trained for rapid deployment worldwide and capable of dealing with a wide range of threats. The Royal Marines are organised into a light infantry brigade and a number of separate units, including one assault group Royal Marines, 43 Commando Royal Marines formerly Fleet Protection Group Royal Marines, and a company strength commitment to the Special Forces Support Group. The Corps operates in all environments and climates, though particular expertise and training is spent on amphibious warfare, Arctic warfare, mountain warfare, expeditionary warfare, and its commitment to the UK's Rapid Reaction Force. Throughout its history, the Royal Marines have seen action in a number of major wars, often fighting beside the British Army, including the 7 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, the Crimean War, World War I and World War II. In recent times, the Corps has been largely deployed in expeditionary warfare roles such as the Falklands War, the Gulf War, the Bosnian War, the Kosovo War, the Sierra Leone Civil War, the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. The Royal Marines have close international ties with Allied Marine forces, particularly the United States Marine Corps and the Netherlands Marine Corps. Today, the Royal Marines are an elite fighting force within the British Armed Forces, having undergone many substantial changes over time. History. The Royal Marines can trace its origins back as far as the 28th of October 1664, when at the grounds of the Honourable Artillery Company, the Duke of York and Albany's maritime regiment of foot was first formed. Early British Empire. On the 5th of April 1755, His Majesty's Marine Forces, 50 companies in 3 divisions, headquartered at Chatham, Portsmouth, and Plymouth, were formed by order of Council under Admiralty control. Initially all field officers were Royal Navy officers, as the Royal Navy felt that the ranks of Marine field officers were largely honorary. This meant that the furthest a Marine officer could advance was to Lieutenant Colonel. It was not until 1771 that the first Marine was promoted to Colonel. This attitude persisted well into the 1800s. During the rest of the 18th century, they served in numerous landings all over the world, the most famous being the landing at Belle Isle on the Brittany coast in 1761. They also served in the American War of Independence, being particularly courageous in the Battle of Bunker Hill led by Major John Pitcairn. In 1788 a detachment of 4 companies of Marines, under Major Robert Ross, accompanied the First Fleet to protect a new colony at Botany Bay. Due to an error, the fleet left Portsmouth without its main supply of ammunition, and were not resupplied until the fleet docked in Rio de Janeiro midway through the voyage. One author has claimed that the Marines deliberately spread smallpox among Australia's indigenous population in order to reduce its military effectiveness, but this is not corroborated by contemporaneous records of the settlement, and most researchers attribute the indigenous smallpox outbreak to other causes. In 1802, largely at the instigation of Admiral the Earl St. Vincent, they were titled the Royal Marines by King George III. The Royal Marines Artillery was formed as a separate unit in 1804 to man the artillery in bomb ketches. These had been manned by the Army's Royal Regiment of Artillery, but a lawsuit by a Royal Artillery officer resulted in a court decision that Army officers were not subject to naval orders. As RMA uniforms were the blue of the Royal Regiment of Artillery, they were nicknamed the Blue Marines, and the infantry element, who wore the scarlet uniforms of the British infantry, became known as the Red Marines, often given the semi-derogatory nickname lobsters by sailors. During the Napoleonic Wars, the Royal Marines participated in every notable naval battle on board the Royal Navy's ships and also took part in multiple amphibious actions. Marines had a dual function aboard ships of the Royal Navy in this period. Routinely, they ensured the security of the ship's officers and supported the maintenance of discipline in the ship's crew, and in battle, they engaged the enemy's crews, whether firing from positions on their own ship, or fighting in boarding actions. In the Caribbean theatre, volunteers from freed French slaves on Marie Galante were used to form the first corps of colonial marines. These men bolstered the ranks, helping the British to hold the island until reinforcements arrived. This practice was repeated during the War of 1812, where escaped American slaves were formed into the Second Corps of Colonial Marines. These men were commanded by Royal Marines officers and fought alongside the regular Royal Marines counterparts at the Battle of Bladensburg. Throughout the war, Royal Marines units raided up and down the east coast of America, including up the Penobscot River and in the Chesapeake Bay. They fought in the Battle of New Orleans and later helped capture Fort Boyer in Mobile Bay in what was the last action of the war. In 1855, the infantry forces were renamed the Royal Marines Light Infantry. During the Crimean War in 1854 and 1855, 3 Royal Marines earned the Victoria Cross, 2 in the Crimea and 1 in the Baltic. In 1862, the name was slightly altered to Royal Marine Light Infantry. The Royal Navy did not fight any other ships after 1850 and became interested in landings by naval brigades. In these naval brigades, the function of the Royal Marines was to land first and act as skirmishers ahead of the sailor infantry and artillery. This skirmishing was the traditional function of light infantry. For most of the history, British Marines had been organized as fusiliers. In the rest of the 19th century, the Royal Marines served in many landings, especially in the First and Second Opium Wars against the Chinese. These were all successful except for the landing at the mouth of the Piho in 1859, where Admiral Sir James Hope ordered a landing across extensive mud flats. The Royal Marines also played a prominent role in the Boxer Rebellion in China, where a Royal Marine earned a Victoria Cross. Pursuing a career in the Marines had been considered social suicide through much of the 18th and 19th centuries, since Marine officers had a lower standing than their counterparts in the Royal Navy. An effort was made in 1907 through the Common Entry or Selborne scheme to reduce the professional differences between RN and room officers through a system of common entry that provided for an initial period of service where both groups performed the same roles and underwent the same training. World Wars. First World War. During the First World War, in addition to the usual stations aboard ship, Royal Marines were part of the Royal Naval Division, which landed in Belgium in 1914 to help defend Antwerp and later took part in the amphibious landing at Gallipoli in 1915. It also served on the Western Front. The division's first 2 commanders were Royal Marine Artillery Generals. Other Royal Marines acted as landing parties in the naval campaign against the Turkish fortifications in the Dardanelles before the Gallipoli landing. They were sent ashore to assess damage to Turkish fortifications after bombardment by British and French ships and, if necessary, to complete their destruction. The Royal Marines were the last to leave Gallipoli, replacing both British and French troops in a neatly planned and executed withdrawal from the beaches. The Royal Marines also took part in the Zeebrugge raid in 1918. 5 Royal Marines earned the Victoria Cross in the First World War, 2 at Zeebrugge, 1 at Gallipoli, 1 at Jutland and 1 on the Western Front. Between the wars. After the war, Royal Marines took part in the Allied intervention in Russia. In 1919, the 6th Battalion RMLI mutinied and was disbanded at Murmansk. The Royal Marine Artillery and Royal Marine Light Infantry were amalgamated on the 22nd of June 1923. Post-war demobilization had seen the Royal Marines reduced from 55,000 to 15,000 in 1922, and there was Treasury pressure for a further reduction to 6,000 or even the entire disbandment of the Corps. As a compromise, an establishment of 9,500 was settled upon, but this meant that 2 separate branches could no longer be maintained. The abandonment of the Marines' artillery role meant that the Corps would subsequently have to rely on Royal Artillery support when ashore, that the title of Royal Marines would apply to the entire Corps, and that only a few specialists would now receive gunnery training. As a form of consolation, the dark blue and red uniform of the Royal Marine Artillery now became the full dress of the entire Corps. Royal Marine officers and SNCOs, however, continue to wear the historic scarlet in mess dress to the present day. The ranks of private, used by the RML, and gunner, used by the RMA, were abolished and replaced by the rank of Marine. Second World War. During the Second World War, a small party of Royal Marines were first ashore at Namsos in April 1940, seizing the approaches to the Norwegian town preparatory to a landing by the British Army 2 days later. The Royal Marines formed the Royal Marine Division as an amphibiously trained division, parts of which served at Dakar and in the capture of Madagascar. After the assault on the French naval base at Anse-Irene in Madagascar was held up, 50 Sea Service Royal Marines from HMS Remmels, commanded by Captain Martin Price, were landed on the quay of the base by the British destroyer HMS Anthony after it ran the gauntlet of French shore batteries defending Diego Suarez Bay. They then captured 2 of the batteries, which led to a quick surrender by the French. In addition, the Royal Marines formed mobile naval base defense organizations similar to the United States Marine Corps defense battalions. One of these took part in the defense of Crete. Royal Marines also served in Malaya and in Singapore, where due to losses they were joined with remnants of the 2nd Battalion, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders to form the Plymouth Argylls. The Royal Marines formed 1 commando which served at Jep. 1 month after Jep, most of the 11th Royal Marine Battalion was killed or captured in an ill-staged amphibious landing at Tobruk in Operation Agreement. Again, the Marines were involved with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, this time the 1st Battalion. In 1942, the infantry battalions of the Royal Marine Division were reorganized as commandos, joining the British Army Commandos. The division command structure became a Special Service Brigade Command. The support troops became landing craft crew and saw extensive action on D-Day in June 1944. A total of 4 Special Service Brigades were raised during the war, and Royal Marines were represented in all of them. A total of 9 Room Commandos were raised during the war, numbered from 40 to 48. 1 Commando Brigade had just 1 Room Battalion, number 45 Commando. 2 Commando Brigade had 2 Room Battalions, Nos 40 and 43 Commandos. 3 Commando Brigade also had 2, Nos 42 and 44 Commandos. 4 Commando Brigade was entirely Royal Marine after March 1944, comprising Nos 41, 46, 47 and 48 Commandos. 1 Commando Brigade took part first in the Tunisia campaign and then assaults on Sicily and Normandy, campaigns in the Rhineland and crossing the Rhine. 2 Commando Brigade was involved in the Salerno landings, Anzio, Comacchio, and operations in the Argenta Gap. 3 Commando Brigades served in Sicily and Burma. 4 Commando Brigades served in the Battle of Normandy and in the Battle of the Scheldt on the island of Walcheren during the clearing of Antwerp. In January 1945, 2 further Room brigades were formed, 116th Brigade and 117th Brigade. Both were conventional infantry, rather than in the commando role. 116th Brigade saw some action in the Netherlands, but 117th Brigade was hardly used operationally. In addition, 1 landing craft assault unit was stationed in Australia late in the war as a training unit. In 1946, the Army Commandos were disbanded, leaving the Royal Marines to continue the commando role. A number of Royal Marines served as pilots during the Second World War. It was a Royal Marines officer who led the attack by a formation of Blackburn skuas that sank the Königsberg. 18 Royal Marines commanded Fleet Air Arm squadrons during the course of the war, and with the formation of the British Pacific Fleet were well represented in the final drive on Japan. Captains and majors generally commanded squadrons, whilst in one case LT, Colonel R.C. Hay on HMS Indefatigable was Air Group Coordinator from HMS Victorious of the entire British Pacific Fleet. Throughout the war, Royal Marines continued in the traditional role of providing ships detachments and manning a proportion of the guns on cruisers and capital ships. They also provided the crew for the UK's minor landing craft and the Royal Marines Armoured Support Group manned Centaur YV tanks on D-Day. One of these is still on display at Pegasus Bridge. Only 1 Marine was awarded the Victoria Cross in the Second World War for action at Lake Comacchio in Italy. Hunter was the most recent Room Commando to be awarded the medal. The Royal Marines Boom Patrol Detachment under Blondie Haslow carried out Operation Frankton and provided the basis for the post-war continuation of the SBS post-colonial era. The Corps underwent a notable change after 1945, however, when the Royal Marines took on the main responsibility for the role and training of the British Commandos. The Royal Marines have an illustrious history, and since their creation in 1942, Royal Marines Commandos have engaged on active operations across the globe every year, except 1968. Notably, they were the first ever military unit to perform an air assault insertion by helicopter during the Suez Crisis in 1956. They were also part of the land element during the Falklands War. Today, personnel the Royal Marines are part of the Naval Service and under the full command of Fleet Commander. The rank structure of the Corps is similar to that of the British Army, with officers and other ranks recruited and initially trained separately from other naval personnel. Women are only permitted to serve in the Royal Marines Band Service. On average, 1,200 recruits and 2,000 potential recruits, and 400 potential officers attend training courses and acquaint courses at CTCRM every year. At its height in 1944 during the Second World War, more than 70,000 people served in the Royal Marines. Following the Allied victory, the Royal Marines were quickly reduced to a post-war strength of 13,000. When national service finally came to an end, in 1960, the Marines were again reduced, but this time to an all-commando trained force of 9,000 personnel. As of October 2014, the Royal Marines had a strength of 7,760 regular and 750 Royal Marines Reserve, giving a combined component strength of around 8,510 personnel. The Royal Marines are the only European Marine Marine force capable of conducting amphibious operations at brigade level. Equipment. Infantry. The basic infantry weapon of the Royal Marines is the L85A2 assault rifle, sometimes fitted with the L123A3 underslung grenade launcher. Support fire is provided by the L110A1 light machine gun, the L7A2 general-purpose machine gun and the L111A1 heavy machine gun. Indirect fire by the L16A2 81mm mortar. Sniper rifles used include the L115A3, produced by Accuracy International. More recently, the L129A1 has come into service as the designated marksman rifle. Other weapons include the Javelin anti-tank missile, the L107A1 pistol, the L131A1 pistol and the Fairburn Sykes fighting knife. Armor. The Royal Marines maintain no heavy armored units. Instead, they operate a fleet of lightly armored and highly mobile vehicles intended for amphibious landings or rapid deployment. The primary armored fighting vehicle operated by the Armored Support Group is the BVS-10 Viking all-terrain armored vehicle. Other lighter vehicles include the Land Rover Wolf armored patrol vehicle, the Jackal armored vehicle and the Pinzgau high mobility all-terrain vehicle. Artillery. Field artillery support is provided by 29 Commando Regiment Royal Artillery of the British Army using the L118 light gun, a 105mm towed howitzer. The regiment is commando-trained. Aviation. The Commando Helicopter Force of the Fleet Air Arm provides transport helicopters in support of the Royal Marines. It currently uses both Sea King transport and Lynx transport reconnaissance helicopters to provide direct aviation support for the Corps. The Sea Kings will be replaced by 25 Merlins transferred from the Royal Air Force and upgraded during 2017 to 2020. In addition, the Royal Air Force provides Chinook heavy-lift Merlin HC-3 and Puma HC-2 medium-lift transport helicopters. Vessels. The Royal Marines operate a varied fleet of military watercraft designed to transport troops and material from ship to shore or conduct river or estuary patrols. These include the 200TDX landing craft Air Cushion, the Mk9 and Mk10 landing craft utility, the Mk5 landing craft vehicle personnel and the SDV Mk8 Mod 1 swimmer delivery vehicle for special forces. Other smaller amphibious craft such as the offshore raiding craft, rigid raider and inflatable raiding craft are in service in much greater numbers.